Hi, I'm Jim, W6LG, your ham radio Elmer here on YouTube. Welcome to my radio room in Rockland, California. Um, I put up a video a few weeks ago that was really popular about RM11953. I'm going to turn that back on, but I need to explain why it got turned off. I became seriously ill and ended up in the hospital on a Monday having to have emergency surgery. I had a port in my chest right here, and the line ran up into my neck. That became infected with sepsis, which, if that wasn't bad enough, when my uh, neckline had expanded out in just a matter of a couple of days, and it was like I was sore. It felt sore. Doesn't feel sore now. I had a blood clot in there. It was roughly 4 inches long and about a ½ inch in diameter. And when I saw the scan, I was shocked. So, um, was admitted right away on a Monday that evening. Surgery was performed. Spent the next 5 days. Spent the next 5 days laying in a hospital bed, getting Lovenox and vancomycin and a bunch of other things. Fortunately, I was able to go home. Here at the house, I've been receiving home health nurse care, and I've got a port now installed in my arm, 2 lines, and for 4 hours a day receiving vancomycin and other chemicals. So the video was really popular. I had no way to respond to comments being made, and so it was better to shut it off. Doctors told me get rid of stress. It was definitely a stressful video. It was difficult to produce and difficult to defend. And along those lines, um, some other guys on other channels, some young man in Florida made some rather unfortunate comments about me, saying I was bad for amateur radio, and he was 100%, as he waved his finger, in favor of the proposed rulemaking, the RM11953. Also, Dave Kassler said, implying that it was me, that I was freaking out. Well, there was nothing about what I said in the video that was screaming or yelling or me freaking out. Um, and so those comments at best were unfortunate. And guy in Florida, I don't know who that is. It's just some guy who's new to amateur radio and uh, even newer to HF, lecturing me on what might happen. I've been on the air for 60 years. I understand a little bit more than he does. I've had a lot more experience. I've done a lot more things, and it's it's one thing to go after the analysis that I had or the questions I had. It's another thing to come after me personally. I'm laying in a hospital bed. I can't respond. Today is really the first day I've been able to do much of anything. Um, Dave Kassler's review of the proposal is, I believe, flawed, and that's okay. We can debate the merits of his analysis or my analysis and carry on a conversation. But to describe me as freaking out, I think, is unfair and unwarranted and really unbecoming. So, um, what I want to do is go through the ARRL's response to ARM 11953. And basically, they support pretty much everything that I said. And what I did is I went through the narrative part of their filing. By the way, the filing must have cost a small fortune. The I don't know if Ed Hare did this voluntarily because he saw it as a huge problem or what. But if you had to hire somebody like Ed Hare to perform that kind of analysis, that kind of engineering analysis, I suspect it would have been many tens of thousands of dollars, let alone the attorneys involved who know how to file these kinds of things. Along those lines, the ARRL's filing was right at the deadline, and I'm not sure if that was strategic or what. It appeared to be that way because they filed like right at the deadline. Um, the narrative part of their approach is written in a way that I don't understand, but um, I guess it's maybe fits a format that they've done because they have the tons of experience and I have none. Um, Maybe if it's a format that is suitable for the FCC. Um, Beyond that, I don't know. So what I did, man, I really don't know. So I went through the narrative part of the ARRL's response, and I'm just going to hit some bullet points. Some of them will say the same things over and over again. Let's see if I can bring that up on the screen now. Okay, so here we go. Here again, I cherry picked and created bullet points from the ARRL narrative that precedes the technical analysis done by Ed Hare. And let me get down to that part. And they talk about Ed Hare in 37 years, and absolutely positively, he's recognized around the world as an expert. You don't get anybody any better than that. Um, the the next bullet point, ARRL's analysis concludes that Part 90 operations, and again, Part 90 is what they're trying to change. Those are the rules that apply outside of the amateur bands, as they would be permitted under the proposed rules, would not just threaten to cause harmful interference to amateur communications, but would cause widespread disruption to amateur and other communication services on multiple spectrum bands. The proposed rules are seriously flawed and would adversely impact other services as well as the amateur radio service. In a subsequent video, I'm going to talk about the definition of amateur radio by the FCC. Nowhere in the definition does it use the word hobby. This results in the amateur bands being especially vulnerable to harmful interference from out-of-band emissions and spurious emissions from adjacent Part 90 bands. The new high-power digital operations inevitably will cause significant harmful interference to many users of adjacent and nearby spectrum, including operators in the amateur radio service. Specifically, the adoption of SMC's proposal would permit digital modulation sidebands to be greater than the current Part 90 HF limits on spurious emissions and intrude as much as 100 kilohertz into amateur bands themselves that are only 300 to 450 kilohertz wide. So when the young man on the East Coast says he's all for this, he has not a clue, because the ARRL's conclusion from the test done by Ed Hare that this would intrude 100 kilohertz into the amateur bands. I would submit it's actually more than that. That has to do with the gain of the antenna in the ERP. SMC proposes out-of-band emission limits that offer less protection than the existing Part 90 limits. It would actually permit no attenuation, 0 dB, at the edge of adjacent allocations, many of which are bands allocated to and heavily used by the amateur radio service. The results is that, if adopted, the new high-power digital operations inevitably will cause significant harmful interference to many users of adjacent and nearby spectrum, including operators of the amateur radio service. They've said this over and over again, and I'm repeating it because that's the way they wrote it up. SMC submits no information that suggests that any sort of operation was ever conducted that could be called a test for interference with observers of any sort. Dave Kassler, this is one of the things that you said they had done. It made no sense to me. The ARRL says it didn't happen. We note in particular that comments filed by the Dayton Group on page 5, of which is reproduced on a spectrum capture of a signal apparently transmitted under experimental license, and it goes into WI2XXG. At the time of the capture, the HFT experimental station was transmitting only a 20 kilohertz wide signal located 25 kilohertz above the band edge, yet harmful interference is clearly observed for tens of kilohertz inside the amateur band. Keep in mind a couple things. I tried to find this call sign as a license. I couldn't find it on the FCC website. It probably does exist. I just couldn't figure out how to get there from here. The other thing, too, is the interference that was captured was that off to the side or directly in the path of the radiated signal. So what may be tens of kilohertz for one might be hundreds of kilohertz for another. It also became apparent that destructive interference would result if operations commenced using anything other than close to these rules. In other words, if these rules are adopted, it will result in destructive interference to the amateur bands. Let me back up on the screen and okay, I was on a planning commission, and there's a really have to reach for the to compare that to this, but we were called commissioners. Somebody would propose, let's say, to develop a site, and maybe the site would have a grocery store, fast food restaurant, houses, whatever, and neighbors would set up a series of objections. Staff would boil those objections down to simple notations. 15 people said this, 20 people said this, noise, lights, and the rest of it. What would happen then is the applicant, like this company, would say, okay, fine, we will do the following things to mitigate those issues with the neighbors. We'll install shields around the lights. We won't allow any noise emitting from the facilities, whatever the things were that came up. In some cases, it would draw down the water table in the area because it'd be pumping out water for many houses, and the company would have a way to say, well, we will fix that. I think that it's highly possible that this proposed rulemaking will pass. And what they will do is they'll come back and say, we have these objections. I listed like 10. The ARRL has 3 or 4 in there repeated that I picked out. SMC can say, well, okay, here's what we proposed. Here's what the ARRL says will happen. We'll resolve that problem by doing X. If in fact that happens, we have a shot at the destructive interference being moved away, and we don't hear from it. There are a lot of hoops that group is going to have to go over to get the thing passed. because there are many other services in that range that would need to be protected. And you start saying, okay, this is for airliners, this is for the military. Now all of a sudden, to get that kind of protection from the proposed transmitter, they have to go up or down a lot. As to whether or not that signal can be squeezed in as described, I simply don't know. Anyway, I'm not freaking out. I never freaked out, even when I went into the hospital and it looked like I was in, well, really serious condition and that there's a chance I wouldn't survive. I just stayed as calm as I could and did what I was told. And same thing here at the house. And for those who did make contact with me and offer to help out, thank you very much. Really do appreciate it. It means a lot. So I was distressed by being too ill to respond to those who made some really outrageous comments, um, including the guy in the East Coast who it's it just shows that I was bad for amateur radio and beginners. Um, it's insulting at best, and unfortunately, he has a huge subscriber base. I am Jim W6LG, your ham radio Elmer here on YouTube. Again, I'm going to put up the other video, get it going, which was the original one, and we'll see where this goes. I think the ARRL missed a golden opportunity, and I'll talk about that in another video. For now, 73. Thank you.